Enforcement tactics are coming under scrutiny after the fatal police shooting of a mentally ill Bronx woman. And while 911 remains the last resort for worried neighbors and family members, the city is unveiling a new program to get urgent help where it's needed the most. The death of 66-year-old Deborah Danner was met with sadness, grief, and outrage. Neighbors called police after they heard her screaming. She initially confronted them with scissors, which they convinced her to drop. But then she picked up a baseball bat. Instead of using a taser, the NYPD says Sergeant Hugh Berry fired 2 shots, killing her.
We failed as an agency. I think it's important that any time that we receive a 911 call for somebody that's in need of help and we respond and we don't do the best job we could do, and they end up dead, I think it's incumbent upon me as the police commissioner to make sure that that never happens again.
O'Neill says the NYPD has some of the best procedures and training in the country for dealing with the mentally ill, but they are reviewing their methods.
We take a good hard look anytime we have an incident.
Danner had been battling the disease since her 20s and rejected help from close family members. Now there's new help for those suffering from mental illness and their loved ones. It's the city's NYC Well program, launched by First Lady Shirlane McCray. It's a talk, text, chat, multilingual lifeline that's quick and confidential. Call 1-888-NYC-WELL.
They provide immediate relief for mental illness emergencies and provide linkages to the services if it's not necessarily an emergency at that particular time and it's just that you need someone to talk to.
The number of 911 calls for emotionally disturbed people continues to rise, with the NYPD responding to more than 350 emergencies each day. But it doesn't always have to get to that point. A continuum of care is available, especially if you have a low income.
They're even more eligible for a lot of services through Medicaid than even middle-class working people who have insurance.
The bottom line here is that the mayor, police commissioner, and many in the community believe that Deborah Danner should not have had to die from her disease. Now let's take it to our panel and find out what they have to say. Joining us, Sergeant Henry Marrero. He's a law enforcement officer with 20 years experience on the job. He's a political activist in his community, and he also just underwent crisis intervention training, which we're going to hear about, and he is also a hostage negotiator. Henry, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Lisa.
We appreciate it. Also with us is hip-hop artist and activist with the Justice League NYC, Mysonne. He has been out at the precinct in the Bronx where this incident happened practically every night leading the protest there. Mysonne, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And also with us is Dr. Jeff Gardere. He's a clinical psychologist. He's also a professor in behavioral medicine, and you have seen him everywhere on television, from Fox 5 to Love and Hip Hop to the Real Housewives franchise. And he has seen it all and dealt with so many issues, and that's why he's here with us today. Dr. Jeff, thanks so much for being with us.
Lisa, thank you for inviting me and being here with your incredible panel.
Well, we appreciate it. Dr. Jeff, I want to start with you on this. How widespread is this problem of mental illness?
Well, latest statistics show that 1 in 4 adults within any particular year have a mental illness, some sort of a mental disorder. When we break that down, we're talking about 57.7 million people can have some sort of a diagnosable issue going on as far as what I like to call a mental health challenge. So this isn't something that just happens, you know, to very few people. This could be a neighbor, this could be a friend, this could be a lover, this could be, you know, people that we work with. They're all part of our society, so it's important that we understand that this is something that many people struggle with, including myself. I've been very vocal about having issues with anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, hypochondriasis, and so on. These are my mental health challenges, but I'm very lucky. I'm able to work on those issues as a professional so that I can help others, but I also have the family support, and I think that's what it comes down to, and we'll talk about that later.
And we are, and we're also going to talk about the breaking point. What's the difference between somebody going through a bad spell, as we would say, and something that's serious and could reach a critical point? Mysonne, why are you out there protesting? And you've been very active in the justice movement for some time, but why this particular case? What bothers you the most about it?
Well, first of all, you know, I grew up in the area, in the Soundview, Castle Hill area. I lived like 20 years of my life, 25 years of my life in the area. And, you know, And the main issue was that this was a 66-year-old woman. You know, I've protested for Eric Gardner. I protested for Michael Brown. I've been all around the world protesting, and I've been standing up for justice. And I don't really think that we do enough protesting for our women. You know, our women this woman was an elderly and mentally ill person, and there's no way that she should have left. She should not have been able to walk out of that apartment. And I'm protesting at the precinct mainly because in any field where there's negligence that ends in death, the person loses their job. And I don't understand how the police department is different. I don't understand how we can, it's obvious that there was negligence. We're still just trying to figure out if it's criminal. And that's okay. If you have to do an investigation to figure out if there's a criminal activity, then investigate that. But there was negligence.
And I want to get into that point. Henry Marrero, you're a law enforcement expert, veteran, many of these tough situations like this. The police commissioner in New York City, James O'Neill, said that we failed. He goes, as an agency, he just came out plain straight out and said, we failed. So he said, and they said almost immediately that this officer did not follow proper procedures. You have a woman, there have been previous police calls to that apartment for at least 4 previous incidents. She has a baseball bat. The neighbors are concerned about her safety and whatever else is going to happen. What's the proper police procedure for that from your experience?
Well, you know, police work is not an exact science, you understand? And all law enforcement officers have to make a split-second decision between life and death. Commissioner O'Neill coming out so fast, it's a political rush to judgment, okay? Because they should let the facts and the nature of the case take its course. Because right now, you're just adding fuel to the fire with so many communities being upset. And as Mysonne said here, that there was some negligence, well, let the facts come out. And if that officer is guilty of doing something wrong, I'm the first guy to say, hey, he should be dealt with accordingly by the law. I'm not one to say, oh, no, he's a great cop, but we weren't there, so we don't know exactly what happened. It was a 10-minute altercation. So from beginning to end, for the mayor and the commissioner and Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz to come out and say that, you know, they know excessive force, it's absolutely a little, you know, too early.
Okay, but
But Henry, we have to look at the collective unconscious here, right? What is going on with our society in that we see these cases over and over again. Let me point out Eleanor Bumpers, what happened to her. This was a woman who was elderly, who had psychiatric problems, and she was shot down like an animal. And so when we're talking about someone who's in her 60s, who has schizophrenia, there's a recorded history that she has had these mental health challenges, and that there are ways to approach this, and somehow there's not the triangulation of the information where the police officers don't have that information. Why
but they
don't
knew
they
they had
have
been
that?
there, Jeff. They can
Right.
tell now how many times they've been to a particular address. So let me ask you this, because this is the reason we wanted to do this show and really get into this issue. This Deborah Danner, the victim, her family, her own family members said that she had been suffering from mental illness since she was in her 20s. That they had done everything to possibly help her in terms of programs, in terms of therapy, in terms of counseling, and that they had moved her next to her mother and next to her sister in those apartments so that they could be involved with her life. So where is the ball dropped there when you have somebody who is very intelligent, as she obviously was, you know, very educated, and yet is suffering from this disease? Where was the ball dropped before that 911 call came?
Well, let me tell you, you know, I like to say that I am very naive because I love people, I believe in humanity, and so before pointing a finger at this particular police officer, I'd rather look at what went wrong. And I think what went wrong was that somehow that information that they should have had was not communicated, perhaps to this particular officer. I will make an assumption, since you are not guilty until, you know, proven so, innocent until proven so, that was not the intention to go in and kill this woman. So what do we need to look at? We need to look at information. We need to look at what happened with the training of this particular officer or some other officers. Here you have someone who's documented with a mental health challenge.
No police officer goes out in the street thinking, today I'm going to kill somebody.
There's a perception that some people don't want to even go for treatment because mentally ill people are often considered violent. Is that a small percentage? Is that the majority? Or does everybody have that potential?
A very small percentage may actually end up being part of some sort of violence, and that may be when they're completely delusional, have broken with reality. So we don't tend to see people with schizophrenia or bipolar to be violent individuals. We see that more with people who have personality disorders, and there are many of those people, and many of those folks have not even been diagnosed, and we don't consider them to be part of the mentally ill. So I just think it's really important that we understand that when we're dealing with those individuals, that we do have to be extremely careful, especially in that kind of a situation where police are called in. I don't know what happened, but I do believe that you need to send out very well-trained police officers.
That's why I definitely agree with you 110%. When Commissioner O'Neill came out, he has access to all those reports. And you don't know how many times you've been to somebody's house, 10, 15, 20 times. And maybe they could come up with a plan. But the mental health system in New York has failed the people. And that's a big problem. And maybe they should address that before they condemn the police department.
Mysonne, do you feel like police officers are totally incapable of being sympathetic just because they're wearing the badge?
Not at all. I believe that there are officers, and in those cases that he gave you the statistics for, those were officers that were capable of doing that. I think in this instance, in the instances that where it fails, that you have officers that walk in without empathy. Because if you're not going to hit your grandmother, if my grandmother comes at me with a bat, I'm going to figure out a way to de-escalate her. If it's somebody that I love, that's an elderly woman, or not even an elderly, if a woman comes at me, I'm going to figure out a way to de-escalate her. Anything short of her aiming a gun at me, I figure I will be able to do that. So when an officer doesn't see that, after he's already talked scissors out of a woman's hand with 4 other officers there, your main priority should be protect her from herself. So you should be giving yourself enough distance that if she has a bat, that she can't even hurt you. You're supposed to make sure things around her. These are procedures that I know, and I'm not even a police officer. So when you realize that there's
because you weren't there. That's what I can't.
We still don't know what the other situation.
How can you? What the other judgment?
Let me throw this.
To say that the officer, they don't have any empathy.
And it's under investigation.
I want to say one thing. Listen to me.
It's under investigation. We still don't know what the precipitating information was.
I know that when you say that the commissioner and the mayor, they know what the procedure is. Somebody gave them a report on what happened before they got up there and had a conversation. So they didn't just make a broad judgment, oh, that's what happened, and got up there. They read the procedure, they know the procedure, they read the report, and they said that it was failed. We failed.
How do you know that?
They said we failed as an agency. Wait, let me just be clear, because let me just be clear, because the police commissioner said the NYPD failed as an agency.
Exactly.
He said the officer did not follow, the sergeant did not follow proper procedure. He said the NYPD's procedures for dealing with emotionally disturbed people or mentally ill people are among the best policies in the country.
He didn't
That's
make
what
that
he
up.
said. But Henry, I want to ask you this. I want to ask all of our guests this. With these high-profile incidents we've seen going back a couple of years, but especially after this summer with the terrible tragedies we saw with Baton Rouge, with St. Paul, where there's this heightened tension between police and communities of color, do you feel that is that in the back of police officers' minds?
Well, listen, this year alone, 103 officers have been killed in the line of duty. 46 of them have been ambushed and shot by gunfire. So that is, it's a very alarming statistic that you don't have an uprising on that.
How many blacks have been killed this year alone by the police? I'm just asking.
Let him finish, and then we'll talk about that.
I'm just explaining something to you.
Okay.
So how is it that our life is less valuable than yours or anybody else's on the street? We have to go home to our families every single day as well. And no police officer goes out on the street thinking, today I'm going to kill somebody.
Let's talk about the police. When do people don't want it to go back to the 90s when you would call 911, something was happening, and it would take a long time if they showed up?
But I think at this point the people are prepared to police themselves. I think that's what I think.
That's
What?
called
No,
anarchy.
it's not anarchy. It's like
called anarchy.
Listen to me. We have people who, like Erica Ford. We have Shanduke McFadden. We have organizations who de-escalate. They go to the communities and they de-escalate these crimes. They have Erica has over a year of no shooting inside Queens. Like it's not anarchy. They're funded by the government. I think at this point, the way that the police, when you can't walk into a 66-year-old woman's house and get a bat from her and she has to die, I think people lose faith in the police. So I think until the good cops are able to say, this is wrong, and somebody made a mistake here, instead of saying, we don't know what happened.
Isn't it enough that the police commissioner says he didn't follow procedure?
No, you know
this
why
was
it's
a
not
mistake.
enough? Because we also have
Isn't
him
that a
saying,
start, though?
No,
Isn't
it's
that
a
a
start,
start?
but we also have him saying we don't. He's premature in his judgment. See,
You're actually you are actually saying that this guy had no empathy for this woman. That's what you're saying. You're saying that I don't see what I'm not backing anybody up. I don't even know the facts. I don't even know the facts, but I do. I can tell you this, that you have never been in a situation like that.
But I'm gonna ask you a question.
You can never talk like that.
You go to your house and your grandmother is
my grandmother has nothing to do with this. This is not the topic. No, absolutely not.
All right, let's just say
a
friend's grandmother, and she's irate, and she has a bat in her hand, and you have a gun, and you have a taser. Would you shoot the woman?
I don't know this. I don't know the
But my son, what would you like to see?
My head.
Can you fathom
what if she's swinging the bat in my head?
You're talking about, but you have to talk about what, I mean, we're a country of laws. A lot of times they're not followed, a lot of times they're broken, and concepts.
What does that mean, law?
And I'm just saying, it's like there's certain procedures for dealing with certain situations. There's medical procedures,
were failed.
there's mental,
The commissioner and the mayor said they failed the procedure.
They're reviewing the
procedure to dealing with this woman, they failed at doing that. That's bottom line.
Well, but
Dr. Jeff, what about that?
That's the preliminary judgment.
Dr. Jeff,
that is the preliminary finding. But let me answer Henry's question, if I may. And Henry, it's probably not the way you may answer it. God forbid if my son had a baseball bat and I had a gun, I had a stun gun. That is my son. So and it was a mental health issue. You know, as I like to say, I may not know karate, but I know crazy. And I would find a way, even if it meant, possibly taking a hit, to try to disarm
That's called
him.
empathy.
It's called.
You're not going to take a hit from a baseball bat to your head. I really don't believe that to happen in real life.
And again, the investigation. There's an investigation that's going on
because everybody feels the same way.
But here's a question. Here's a question I want to throw.
Everybody's not a police officer.
Okay, but
you can't find one citizen that tells me that if they walked inside a house with a 66-year-old woman that they wouldn't try to. They wouldn't even take a hit from that.
You're absolutely out of line.
Tell me somebody that's not a police officer that
again, we don't know what was the initial 911 call. There was obviously something had happened, and not to justify what happened. It's a tragedy that Ms. Danner lost her life here. But I want to move forward on this, like move the discussion forward a little bit, because it's like in terms of Dr. Jeff, in terms of, it seems with a lot of the police departments now in the country, the problems of society that are not being dealt with, whether it's homelessness, whether it's homeless mentally ill, whether it's people with mental illness who, whether because of their race, gender, economic status, whatever, are not able to get proper treatment. These problems that we don't deal with as a society end up getting dumped on the police officers and the paramedics, because they're the ones that come with the 911 call. And that's happening at the same time that we have a huge disconnect in our communities between communities of color and the police, and a distrust. So does that wear on people? Does that affect their judgment?
Well, I would think so. But this is certainly where we need to take a more holistic process as part of this. I worked for the Federal Bureau of Prisons for years, and what I started noticing as a chief psychologist in the Bureau of Prisons right here in New York City, we're starting to get all of these mentally ill individuals who are arrested, charged, being put in jail, and these people were psychotic. They weren't trying to commit crimes because of monetary gain. They just were not able to control their behaviors. So we had to look at a retraining of our custodial staff to be able to deal with these individuals, a retooling. At the same time, legislators had to get involved to find out what was going on, why weren't there room in these psychiatric hospitals, what did the mental health system have to do. So I believe that we all have to come to the table.
Thank you all very, very much for being with us for this episode of Street Soldiers. Sergeant Henry Marrero, my son, Dr. Jeff Gardere. Remember, use your mind. It's your best weapon. I hope it's your only weapon. I'm Lisa Evers. Let's push for peace.